What is going on, everybody? It is another Campus to Canton live CFB Best Ball on Underdog, and we got started a little early, so we're going live a little early. I am joined today by Chris K, who published alongside Ethan Sowers the first CFB Best Ball only show, as far as I know, on the Campus Canton Network earlier this week. Chris, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, these are fun, man. I can't get enough of these. So it's my second one of the day. So I'm ready and willing not to fight me over getting on here.
I know. And we're back to back on this one.
So probably work out. It gives us more time to talk in that big gap, right? We have a big gap to talk about picks, which will help, but it might be a little bit. We're going to fight over some players today. We already did earlier, true. So let's do it again.
That is true, and I'm up at 3 overall. I'm going to take Luther Burden. And I took him over. It was deciding between Tetero, McMillan, and Luther Burden for me, which was actually a topic that I wanted to dive into a little bit today.
Yeah, I took Tet, so let's do it.
I find myself going back and forth on these two. Let's set the scene a little bit from last year, right? Luther Burden had 114 targets in a Missouri offense into the slot. That is the position that really gets fed in the Eli Drinkowitz Missouri offense, even going back to his time at Boise State. Average depth of target for each player. These players operate entirely differently. McMillan's on the outside, Burden's in the inside. Burden had an 8.8 average depth of target. Tet McMillan had a 12.9 average depth of target. These players are very different, but we expect similar volume this year. They're going back to back in drafts. I went with Burden, and the big reason why is that I am worried about his injury. He was in a boot in spring camp. It didn't sound super positive when they were at media days. I think that's a good enough tiebreaker because I think these two players are close. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's a perfectly fine tiebreaker. There's a world where we're overreacting, but if you have the third overall pick, do you really, considering how good of an option Burden is, do we really want to take that risk, right? Because I took Tet. It's very real that he misses the first month. And then what kind of value did I get back on this? So I don't have any issue with taking the surefire thing. It's not like if everybody was healthy, Tet would be the number one. And I think it would be consensus. It would be close, but it'd be consensus.
I agree.
But there is the doubt. So I don't have any issue with going Burden. I would have really, gone back and forth between the two if both were available at the fourth. So I don't blame you at all.
Yeah. I mean, he has the upside like both those players do. And I think it's consensus speaking. They're going generally top 5, top 6 in almost every draft. You're not really, outside of Tez Johnson, maybe, projecting a player differently to be the wide receiver 1 overall. So you're really making the decision between those two. I don't think Tez Johnson enters that discussion, especially with the addition of Evan Stewart. So the one thing that I keep coming back to with McMillan is Arizona only returns 51% of their wide receiver tight end snaps. Missouri returns 96%. Is there room for McMillan to grow into that role? Potentially. Earlier, you and I were talking about Malachi Riley, who we expect to slide into the Jacob Cowing role in the slot. I've been drafting, I think you have too, a lot of Montana Lamonia's Craig. Is there upside beyond what we saw from McMillan last season, which was a 1,200-yard year?
Maybe barely. I think in the world of college football, you can always say, yeah, there's potential for more. Maybe Ali Gordon there's no more upside there, but for Tet, I think there certainly could be a little bit more. 1,200 yards is not the craziest stat of all time. The thing that I like with Tet is I think you have to have if you're drafting a bunch of lineups and you have the opportunity, I think you have to have some amount of Tet. And then, we talked about it on the pod this week that with Ethan and myself that your kind of handcuff, your kind of just in case measure is super cheap. Whether it's Montana Lamonia's Craig or whether it's Malachi Riley, we have a ton of MLC and we're just now starting to get on Riley a little bit, but it's super cheap. And if they were to be slotted into that role, you're still getting a ton of value out of it. So maybe you don't get like the best first overall, first pick for your team, but you're still getting a ton of value out of a late pick if crap hits the fan. So that's kind of how I'm looking at Ted and why I don't have any issue taking him in the first round.
Yeah, I think you have to have some of him. Just the upside is massive. I think he could, if he's healthy, and right, that's the big if the whole time. If he's healthy, 1,500 yards, 1,400 yards, I think is certainly in the range of outcomes. I think we could be looking at a fairly big season from him in general. All right, I'm going to take Kyron Drones here.
Getting on the quarterbacks.
We just had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 go in the first 10 picks, and then 4 go in the next 10 after that.
Was Arnold in play, or was it always Drones?
No, I just think the rushing upside of Drones kind of separates them, and they're both the same bye week, so it doesn't really there's no tiebreaker for me. I think the upside for Arnold's good. I just don't know that it's the same for Drones, especially in a 4-point passing touchdown format. And not that I said Arnold wasn't really a rusher, and I don't really think he is, but he's not a net negative on the ground. He'll get you some yardage.
Yeah, he's going to give you something to the level of how much we don't really know for sure. I do waver on him because he looked like he was starting his first game in that BYU game, which was his first start. But then he played in the bowl game against Arizona and looked incredible. I've said in the past, it looked like everybody was on like 1.5x speed in that game. So it is a little bit of I'm a big Drones guy, obviously. It is a little interesting to figure out, okay, well, is there one that I probably want more than the other? They're probably really close to each other. I think for me, both of them, they got to be like back to back in whatever order. I'm not positive.
Yeah, and I just took Arnold. I really wanted Restrepo to fall to me. He did not. I didn't know what the turn was going to be like for quarterback, so I went Drones instead of Restrepo, and maybe I could have snuck him through. But I don't usually go to quarterback in the first 3 rounds, but I have a feeling quarterback's going to drop pretty quickly here.
Oh, but it definitely has. I think we're already at the dry level, because if the next best option is it was Jalen Daniels. Now it's Brady Cook, Haynes King, Nussmeier. You want to talk about not being able to run. Nussmeier's there. Bex is kind of there. Howard runs. Cook runs. King. Well, we've already touched on King a million times. So it gets pretty thin. You have to start getting a little strategic on these quarterbacks. I probably will be forced into one here shortly. Maybe this is my first Noah Fafita share coming up.
I thought you might take him in the 3rd round, although that would have been early for him.
Yeah, I could never take a non-runner in the 3rd round. Maybe in the 5th I would consider it though, which would be right on par with his
ADP.
Yeah.
So we've seen a lot of quarterbacks come off the board. Is there one that sticks out to you as an exceptionally good or bad value?
I think Shedeur Sanders is awful value. Dart is probably an incredible value at the 13th pick. I think we're probably overthinking the playoff bye for one quarter. Go get your studs. If you're gonna I already have a couple that are in the playoff bye, right? I have Concepcion and Jordan James, but I think Concepcion high floor, Jordan James rates incredibly for me. So I don't have any issue with it, and I have a guy kind of at the top of my queue that is another. So I don't have an issue. Studs are studs, right? You got to get there, got to get to the dance, and you can figure out the rest. But you just have to maneuver it a little bit here and a little bit. So, no, I think Jackson Dart is in for a huge season and comparable to Avery Johnson, maybe obviously safer. So I think that's a great pick at 13. And Shedeur, we internally talked about Shedeur, right? What was up with the big chuckle there?
No, I was just I was largely agreeing. I think Shedeur is in the 2nd round is the worst value too. He doesn't have any rushing. He's a negative. He's truly a negative.
It's a negative. It's not even a zero.
Lose you points.
It's not like Noah Fafita. Fafita is probably going to get us, and Nussmeier going to probably get us 0 rushing yards this year.
Yes. Shedeur Sanders might get you negative 100.
Yeah, and that adds up. Like I was going to ask you, what would he have to do this season to be worth the whatever that was 17, 18, 19th pick?
I mean, you're probably looking at 28, 30 touchdowns, right? To pay off about that.
4,000 yards.
I don't know if you need 4,000, but you probably need, if you don't need 4,000, you need a lot of touchdowns to match.
I was going to say you probably need 4,028 or 30, or you probably need what 3,532, 33 touchdowns. Like,
yeah,
it's just so hard to get there, and that's why I don't have any Fafita. Like, they could throw it 40 times, but man, it is hard to get to that level of value, like of worth.
I mean, Fafita and Shador are essentially the same player, right? I mean, they're not really threats in the rushing game. They're going to only throw. They have pretty good weapons, an offense that we think is going to throw, but the difference is like 3 or 4 rounds in ADP, and that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, plus the slight, 1 point per game, probably less because of rushing. But yeah, they are essentially the same player. Yeah. The only difference, although the added difference would be, we would take the Colorado receiver room over Arizona, correct?
So I was thinking about that when I asked the question. Tedero McMillan's the best receiver of all of them.
Mm-hmm.
But you probably have 3 Colorado guys after that before you get to the next Arizona guy. And that's probably Michael Craig, who has not broken out yet, even though we like him as a player.
I like him more as a fit than a player. I think the reason why he's appealing to me is because, like I told Ethan, right? If Jacob Cowing was in this draft, he would be a top 3 round pick. And I'm probably going to get 70% of that in the 18th round. Like, that's what makes me, I don't know if he's an NFL guy, talent wise, but the system is all that matters in college. And so I'm in on that. Sawchuk made it. I was surprised. Sawchuk he rates very, very well for me. I got 2 week 12 buys out of top 4, but it's hard to pass on that.
Yeah, I like Sawchuk there a lot. I see him fall a lot further than he should. Yeah, I think in most drafts. So I've done a little bit unconventional for myself. I went 3 quarterbacks in the first 4 rounds, which I don't think you have to do. I was just surprised Nussmeier, I guess, was there at the end of the 4th, because I've seen him go earlier and earlier. And I think he's really high floor, especially taking Drones and Arnold, which are somewhat question marks.
I think Arnold's more of a question mark than Drones. We've seen Drones, right? I feel way more comfortable with Drones and what he's going to put up. I think you could lock in Drones for 2,000 passing, 800 rushing, 20 passing touchdowns, 6-7 rushing touchdowns fairly easily, like without a doubt to me.
Yeah, I think that's fair. We have seen Drones. Drones was so much, like, significantly better than where we saw him at Baylor that I'm almost still trying to get the stink off of him, because he was not.
It's interesting how that happened, right? Like, he didn't win the job. He lost to Grant Wells. You wonder how much of that was just allegiance to him. And here we are, and Drones is as coveted as he is.
Well, you tell me. You're the Virginia Tech guy.
I think the system just fits well for him. That he's kind of a battering ram of a big quarterback. People will laugh, but their receiver room is really, really good, like college good. Between the different options they have kind of 3 different styles of play. I have said it in the past. I think Nick Gallo is like a good old tight end. Like, I think the options are there, and I don't think they're going to give Tootin so many carries that you have pretty much no value out of. You lose value out of Drones.
Yeah, I think you're right. So if you're enjoying what we're doing here, you enjoy the mock drafts, or not even mock drafts, real drafts that we're doing, getting our entries into the very first Underdog CFB tournament, which is groundbreaking on so many levels. Make sure that you're liking and subscribing to the channel. Make sure you're checking out Campus Kent. And, we have the resources to help you navigate these drafts. We were talking about bye weeks earlier. Week 12 bye weeks are difficult. Playoff matchups are difficult to nail. We have all of that available on the site at our lowest tier, which is $2.99 a month, $29.99 a year. And there is so much more beyond that. But that gets you the ranks, that gets you in the door. I think we have a lot to offer. We have a podcast that Chris and Ethan are doing. It's a fun time to be in the best ball space. It really is.
What do you, while we pivot a little bit away from the actual draft, what's your take on these drafts slowing like really significantly? Is that a negative? Do we see that as, hey, this is pretty standard? How do you see that?
I don't know how long it takes to fill the NFL version, so I honestly can't tell you, but it filled so quickly early on that I think the momentum is there. Here's another problem. I would say legacy DFS, like the big names that you think of over time, are really just now this week starting to get into it. ETR is a good example of, it's taken a week. What is going on? Where is ADP landing? What do we think is optimal strategies? And I think you're seeing more people from the NFL side venture over, and I think it will continue to grow. I expect it to be more steady than it was now that we have some, I think, answers from places people look to do stuff.
Yeah, ETR releasing their stuff is good, and those guys are just, I think they're just super busy. That's why, like, they got in the drafts because they're not too busy to draft, but they have other things going on because they do a lot of this stuff more professionally. So it takes them a minute because they have to digest it all and change kind of their schedules.
For sure. I'm gonna get to the chat real quick. Let's start with this question. Cam Rising could have a Brady Cook type season. Agreed.
Yeah, I love Cam Rising.
We're 18 months removed from his ACL tear. We don't think it's going to affect him this year. It was the Rose Bowl, not last year, but the year before.
Yep.
Probably going to be healthy. He's got obviously the amount of experience in this room. I think there's a lot to like about really that entire offense. And I think Brant Keithy going where he does in drafts might be like the best value. So what we like about Rising is that he has some ability to move on the ground. I don't think that's going to go away considering how far we are removed from the injury, but is there another player that you're trying to stack him with besides Keithy, or are you just running him solo?
I would try not to run him solo. I think he can run. I'm a little hesitant to see how much they'd run him, but I think overall, Dorian Singer comes at such a good price, and there goes Rising at a 701. He comes at such a good price that Dorian Singer to me is the guy. 2 years ago, man, a lot of Arizona content today. 2 years ago at Arizona was awesome. Goes to USC. This is one of many for whatever reason, but he apparently had a ton of chemistry. There's nobody else in that receiver room that's like threatening. Keithy is awesome, but there's more than enough room. And I wonder how much the lack of like superstar run game is going to potentially help the situation, because there is no star running back like we've seen Utah have in the past, right? Like their number one running back is Micah Bernard, and number two is Jalen Glover. Like that's not the most threatening of rooms, and it tends to lean towards pass help, not running help. So I wonder how much that helps the passing game with Singer and Keithy.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I see Singer go, but I always find myself preferring a different option at the end of drafts. But he's the one I would compare. He's the only one that I would really consider outside of Keithy. Like I don't think there's anybody else down the roster.
You'd have to stretch. You'd have to stretch schematically to make a third option valuable. I think Micah Bernard isn't. I wonder how much there's value in like stacking a quarterback with a running back. Not like stacking like from a mental, but like Bernard is a pass catcher, 100%. So I wonder how much you could really kind of double dip there with that.
Totally agree. Similar question, not totally similar question, but from the same user, Ben asked, no love for Will Howard. Yeah, I don't like Will. I don't like Will Howard. I think the offense is going to skew fairly rush heavy, and even though I like the wide receivers, I like Emeka Egbuka, I like Jeremiah Smith. Will Howard, the player, is far more dynamic as a rusher. I just don't know that his ceiling is there. Like it's going to be a more difficult schedule for him. He's going to be in a more difficult situation. I think his ADP at the beginning of the 6th is fine. Like I don't think it needs to go up or down. I think it's appropriate.
It feels right. I can't do it. I just can't pull the trigger.
Oh, I can't either, but I'm not going to argue with where he's going.
I think the 5th, 6th, 7th round range is where I find the best running backs for me. Sampson, Chip Trayanum, Scatterbo's there. Tootin falls maybe to the 5th. Like, there's just a lot of options that I like for me to not go that route at quarterback. There's a lot of, they're going to score a ton, but there's also a lot of mouths to feed. So he will have a good season. The upside feels lacking. I'm not worried about Devin Brown or Julian Saint, but it just feels like the upside is lacking.
Yeah, no, for sure. Let's see. So you finally drafted your quarterbacks.
I got 2. Yeah.
5th round and 7th round.
Stacked both of them.
You stacked Nova Fida with Tet McMillan and Casey Concepcion with Grayson McCall. I see. So you mentioned it earlier, but you are not as avoidant. I think that's a word. Of the week 12 bye weeks, I think is maybe you were a couple days ago or even like last week.
So I have 3 week 12 buys right now and a 13. I was hesitant on McCall, but because I have Concepcion, I figured let's just do it and see what happens. Like Jordan James is an incredible player for me. I feel like in week 12 I only need one other running back there, right? So like I'm not concerned about losing Sawchuk. I'm pretty much to the point though where I'm not going to take another week 12. There's maybe 1 guy, 2 guys total, but like I will be super sensitive to week 12 buys the rest of the way. This is kind of my MO. I typically seem to be taking 3, maybe 4 week 12/13. Recently with like Tez and Jordan James, I'll let a week 13 sneak in, but then from there it just becomes all 10s and 11s, 9s, 10s, 11s, basically.
Yeah, and I think like we mentioned earlier, right? The Campus Canton has not only do we have the rankings, we also have the bye weeks, and then we have a schedule matrix where you can see the playoff matchups. So who is a great replacement for somebody in week 12 helps you answer those questions, and then what your entire team looks like. You can enter the players and keep the queue going from that perspective, just to track your bye weeks, which is how I handle it, and I think you do something similar, just so you can get your entire team, because bye weeks might be on Underdog for NFL. They ain't on college. You ain't getting that. You gotta go to an outside source. We got you covered at campuscanton.com. Again, as low as $2.99. And if you like what we're doing here on the show, make sure that you're subscribing to the channel. We try to do these a couple times a week. I am up.
You got snuck up on.
Did
So I took Jalen Noel from Iowa State. So right now I feel like I have a high risk, super high reward with Tet McMillan at receiver, and then I have 2 super high floor guys with Concepcion and Noel. And I feel like at this point I can divert my attention to quarterback, running back, and come back to it. We've talked about how deep the receivers seem to be towards the second half of the draft. So now I'll pick 3 or 4 at the end here and be fine with the room. I'm not concerned about it.
Yeah, I don't think you need to be either. I don't necessarily agree with the chat when they say Howard at ADP with his rushing is better than Nussmeier at ADP without rushing. Yeah, Garrett Nussmeier is not a dual threat. That's true. I think Garrett Nussmeier could throw for 4,000 yards and like 35 touchdowns though this year. Like I think that is within Garrett Nussmeier's range of outcomes, because I think Garrett Nussmeier is a really darn good player. I don't think Will Howard is a really darn good player. I think Will Howard could get replaced by week 7. Do I think it's likely? No, but I think Julian Sand could play a role there. So Garrett Nussmeier to me is like one of the safest players in the entire draft. And I think the upside is also there.
Yeah, I agree on Nussmeier. I think ultimately that could be like a 4,000 yard. I've said it multiple times. And you get a free cheap stack option if you wanted to go that route. non-week 12, 13 buys is good. There's just a lot of appeal to Nussmeier. I haven't a ton of them, but I feel like I'd be more comfortable going that route than I would with Howard.
So, what was the other player that I wanted to touch on? That was Washington State quarterback John Mateer. We chatted about him earlier, and I think we've jumped the shark with him at the beginning of the 8th round. Like, I don't know that there's much upside beyond that, but there's also a ton of risk associated with that selection.
You have to consider what you're putting around him, because now you're spending a high pick on a guy that can do absolutely nothing. So then you have to figure out, okay, what are you going to do with the other options that you take? You're only going to have 5. So you better be really confident with those other 4.
Exactly. H. Goodman, again in the chat. Being good doesn't equal being good at fantasy. Yes, but I was actually thinking about this earlier, where the reason that the quarterback draft strategy has to change a little bit between college and the NFL is, with the NFL, you are investing and building around a franchise quarterback for the next decade. You don't have a guy behind him who you're like, oh, he's going to come in and step in and potentially replace him for the vast majority of teams, right? That's not true in college. Like, there's a true freshman on Ohio State's roster who we think could potentially step in and be good. That is a concern for Will Howard. And like, I keep using that example specifically, but it's not as, I think, solidified as it could be. Yes, they paid him a lot of money. Yes, he's going to start week 1. But I think there's just more risk with those types of players that could be easily replaced, even if you believe the system helps. And I do think the system helps, because I think Chip Kelly knows how to use the dual threat quarterback. It's just more questions, right?
It depends where. I think ultimately talent doesn't matter, but it certainly matters more at Ohio State, LSU, some of these other spots that, they have guys that can replace them.
Yeah.
When you have 2 horrible options, it's nice to chomp at the bits about, hey, this backup should come in, but like, nobody knows anything about the backup, right? Everybody knows everything about Sayan. The Ohio State specifically is loaded at quarterback room. So if you don't play well, it's very quick, especially maybe it's a different situation too, with it being Ohio State, and then there's such high expectations for this year, and at the very least to beat Michigan, that things are different there than would be at other spots. But yeah, I subscribe to the talent doesn't matter theory at this point, because I've seen a lot of awful, I shouldn't say awful, I'm nothing in football. I could not do any of these things. Comparably less talented players in college football do really good things. So
that is totally fair, and why I think we have some players going all over the board really very high, who we're not totally like quote believers in. You took Jadon Blue in the last round though, and Baxter goes earlier in drafts. Tell me why you're taking him in the top 10 rounds, because I think we feel good about the Texas offense, and we know that Steve Sarkisian produces high-end rushing attacks, but Blue and Baxter both in the top 9 rounds.
Yeah, so that's an upside option there, right? There's a lot of touches to go around, enough touches to go around. I also think that I'm disgruntled. I'm flustered. I'm gonna take Hoover there. Another week 12 bye. That's what happens when you're on the clock. But I think, I've completely lost Blue. When you look at the usage last season, there was wasn't as far off as you'd think it would be. So I'm playing for the shot at being the Sarkisian RB1, and it could backfire, but I also like my top 3 running backs already. So pure upside.
Yeah, and I don't think that's a bad strategy either. Automatic, which not auto, but like automatic, like the Ottoman Empire or the name Otto. I'll accept both as options. Asked LeQuint Allen or Kyle Monungai. That's actually a question that I've asked myself in many drafts of which way I want to go. I believe that in general, I really like Kyle Monangai. I think the Rutgers schedule gives him kind of insane upside. It's not very tough. I think he's just a good rusher. Not really worried about the guys behind him. They'll play a role, but the Rutgers offensive line is probably the best shape it's been in a minute too. LaQuinn Allen has receiving upside. I don't really know what the offense is going to look like. We haven't really seen play calling at the FBS level for anybody on that staff. So that like they're right back to back in my rankings. So like I find myself in that same predicament. Chris, do you have a feeling on either of those two?
I have been taking Monangai. I don't mind LaQuinn at all. He gets some pass game usage. Not really anybody threatening behind him. So it feels like a pretty good floor. They're bird in hand, two in the bush, man. It's both are really good options that I think you should have no issue feeling bad about taking. I just have been going more Monangai. I am very excited to see. I've been talking about him for months at this point. I'm very excited to see what he does with a full schedule of essentially Cream Puffs, avoiding every major Big Ten team. So I'm excited to see what he does with it. You could argue that Allen has some question marks because it's a new coaching staff. I think they'd be crazy to do anything other than what we saw last couple of seasons, which is just give him the rock.
Yeah.
So in that vein, I think it's such a slight, like, well, maybe concern, but that's like a reach if you wanted to get real kind of nitpicky.
Yeah, I like them both. They're Monangai's 11, LaQuinn Allen's 12 in my rankings, or our site rankings, and then they went back to back in this draft too, 4, 5, 4, 7. So there's no discount if you're waiting on one versus the other. Oh, what's up? Automatic's in the draft with us. He is drafting out of the 8 spot.
Let's critique the team real quick. Let's crap on it real quick.
I like the team. I said I like Keithy in the 5th. I like Garrett Green. Love Phil Maffa. Like Judkins gonna get. We like LaQuinn Allen. Like this is a good team.
Yeah, that's a good team. I take it back. Can I trade? I actually kind of really dig this team.
Oh, and I like getting Leonard. So this is good. This is a really solid team.
Ooh, that's where all these good quarterbacks have been going. I love Leonard and Stone and those types. So I got to get a quarterback coming up because I can't. I was distracted by a lawnmower. This is what you get for being at a barn while you're drafting. Is you get a barn that makes you move. I'm sorry, a lawnmower that makes you move, and then all of a sudden you're taking Garrett Oakley with the 40 picks ahead of ADP.
I find myself not drafting much Garrett Oakley personally.
He rates for me super well.
Which is a Ben Sinnott projection.
If he's, I think I lowered him to compared to Ben Sinnott, but it's if, right? Like if that's how he plays, then like that's a great spot to be in. But it's certainly an if. It's not a for sure. So I'm gonna look at one thing. Yep. All right, here we go. Sorsby gonna bail me out with the 6-10 bye week. Jives very well with my other guys here. I haven't taken a ton of them because I've kind of ventured more towards like the Greens and some of these quarterbacks earlier that have like the week 10 bye week or a week 6 bye week. Like maybe I already took Cam Rising. Now I don't feel good about taking Sorsby. So the time that I did get those guys here, I am able to get Sorsby. So that's helpful.
Yeah, I like that. I don't know. I just really I've been drafting a lot of Sorsby, and we're higher on him than consensus is in general. He's one of the guys that I take late alongside Ashton Daniels. I probably would have gone whichever you didn't go there. You sniped me on Ashton Daniels earlier when we were drafting. This time I finally got the guy I wanted. So, and I am going to pair him with Cedric Irvin here. Again, I just love the Stanford offense.
Trying to figure out. I love that pick. I'm just trying to figure out where I'm going to go. Daniel Jackson is falling. The week 12s already though are in the back of my head.
I thought about it, and I have a lot of week 12s, so I actually went Irvin instead. But I love Daniel Jackson. I would take Daniel Jackson like 2 rounds earlier than where he goes. I don't really understand why he goes so late, to be totally honest.
So I was talking to Katz about this. Do you think there's people that are taking the other Daniel Jackson thinking that they are taking the good one?
Yes, because I've seen the other Daniel Jackson go in drafts, and I've made that mistake before myself. Too.
It happens.
I think
more
than
people would like to admit, probably. But yeah, it's interesting how that goes.
So we were talking in the Discord earlier too, which if you remember, Camps can request Discord access. It's a banger. Is there a world where you're going 4 quarterbacks instead of 5?
I've done it 4 or 5 times. I better get it too early, like 2 in the top 2-3 rounds, 100%. That's the only way I would do it. I don't hate it. The problem is I think we're far enough along that we know good values and places to maneuver and guys to get that we make our running back receiver rooms feel good. That it hurts to miss on opportunities. So that's why I don't tend to do it anymore. But I definitely have some builds that are like that.
Yeah. No, I think it's super fragile, and I know that you have to be unique and different and take risks to win tournaments, but
is it reckless? I don't think it's reckless, but I do think that should be a small portion of your lineups.
Yes, it's not reckless, but I don't think it's not my preferred build. How about that?
I've done it. I'm not afraid to admit it.
I have felt worse about those teams than I have about my 5 quarterback teams in general.
If you could do a good job on bye weeks, though, you can do it where you don't get any playoff bye weeks. You have if you go Garrett Green and he's 5'10", you get Avery Johnson, that's 6'11". You could get, Orgy 7'12", Aller 3'8", and you have 8 unique bye weeks. You have 1 decent floor Aller that is going to play every day. You have Orgy, who we think is going to play every day, that has some upside. And then I have 2 superstar quarterbacks. Like, if I'm spending up at the beginning like that anyways, like I kind of have the expectation that they're going to play every single week.
I'd be so scared to roll out that with 4.
But if you did it with Hoover instead of Orgy, then you have a little bit less risk of an option. You just have to be you have to be great with bye weeks, and you have to be good with pairing up. Like, the only reason that won't work this season, by the way, is injury. Only way that doesn't work. If Garrett Green gets hurt week 4 and we never see him again, like that 4 quarterback is killed. Same with like Nico or Avery. Like, to me, that's how that fails miserably.
Which you don't have to over account for injury, but I do think you have to account for it. So I would rather sacrifice a tight end and go 1 tight end and 5 quarterbacks than I would 4 quarterbacks and 2 tight ends.
Well, yeah, the opportunity or the pricing, or I'm not pricing, the scoring that you're missing is so much worse at quarterback versus tight end. Yeah, I would agree. Is that kind of why you think the same way?
Not sacrifice a roster spot, but to change your build, that's how I would do it. If you like 4 quarterbacks, go and get the 5th and then just cut back on tight end. I don't think you need more than 2 tight ends. I just don't think there's a reason why you need more than that in these builds. I think 1 is totally fine too, as long as it's not a week 12 bye. You cannot have a tight end with a playoff bye if you're only drafting 1 tight end. That's just it's not DOA, but it's probably not optimal.
It doesn't feel good. It's close. What do you think about pre-scoring? Talking about tight ends that have week 12.
I like pre-scoring.
I feel like I'm not getting enough. I said this the other day. I feel like I'm just not getting as much as I should because I'm leery of that week 12 bye, but ultimately that should be like the farthest thing in my head. Yeah, now we're both like, this is the hard part of the show because you're sifting through options that don't screw you on bye weeks.
I know. I'm going to take Nathan Carter here, though. Not that I'm his biggest fan, but I'm not really drafting a lot of him, and I think he's by far the best running back at that Michigan State room.
Yeah.
And having a quarterback who can run like Childs can, I think opens up a little bit for him. So he's our RB67, and I took him a little bit above ADP, but I don't really mind taking that risk there.
It's we're definitely in kind of my guy area. You shouldn't feel bad about taking a guy that you're confident in at this point, for sure.
Yeah. Well, what was the other? Oh, I was going to ask you this question because you're the Michigan guy. Mullings. I think the answer to the question is, would you draft him? The answer is yes.
Mm-hmm.
I think the question is, how early would you draft him?
People seem to be on him a little bit, so I probably would say, like, I think if you want to ensure you get him, you would have to take him basically in like the 16th round. I feel like maybe 17th you could squeak by. I was looking at Volume Pigs' article, just kind of like the free portion of it, and I'm just like, I can see why it makes so much sense to take him. And I've talked about Mullings in the past. I'm just kind of figuring out how much do I want to take the risk on a second running back. You know, I did it with Jaden Blue. So what's the difference with Mullings? He's just much cheaper.
Much cheaper.
Just much cheaper. That's probably the best way I should think about it. So,
and touchdowns are a lot more valuable in this format. Like, if you're drafting Mullings, you're drafting him probably assumption that they want to use him as a goal line guy and get those rushing touchdowns.
Yeah, Donovan Edwards is not great around the goal line, but Alex Orji, if he's the guy, is. There was a quote that came out yesterday that basically said, like, we're going to get him the football. Like, he's going to get play. It's a quarterback battle, but he will have snaps and plays designed for him. Like, I mean, we saw it in the national championship run. He had plays in key moments against Ohio State. Like, why wouldn't he have the same thing throughout the entire regular season?
Listen, you don't have to sell me on it. I was drafting him early on. I haven't drafted any Donovan Edwards though. I just don't know how much his role is going to expand. I know it can expand.
You just have to hope that he is 80% usage like Corum. Usage really was years ago. It was like really 1A, 1B, and then Edwards kind of took a step back, and Corum took a step forward, and reliability, and they kind of understood where their offense was. This kind of goes back to like how I feel about Edwards around the goal line. It's not that he's like that bad at it. It's just Corum was good enough. And like the downside of Edwards was like losing 3-4 yards. The downside of Corum was getting nothing. So I think Michigan said, we'll just run it 4 times. And I know that Corum one time will get me the touchdown. But Edwards, it was like, well, he might lose 5 on this one. And I think that just didn't fit the mold of what Michigan was trying to do.
Yeah, I agree. Which scares the crap out of me in terms of taking him. Where did he go in this draft?
Edwards probably early 3rd. I think he was there.
Third, 306.
I would consider him. I've taken him. I think you'd be crazy not to take him once or twice, right? I mean, the upside of a Michigan running back is just crazy, but it just feels like an opportunity you should sprinkle a little bit.
I think you have to. You can't not take him, but he's probably somebody I'll be underweight on. And we don't have him that high in our rankings either because of, I think, what we perceive more risk. Right? We have Edwards, and I'm on the clock, whatever, at RB 18, behind Abu Sama, behind Cam Scadabo, behind CJ Baxter, behind Gavin Sawchuk. I think I would still take those guys over him.
I probably wouldn't for Sama, and I wouldn't. It's close. I wouldn't for Scadabo. I wouldn't. I'm not a big Sama guy. I have some, but it's just not like the best feeling pick. Scadabo I wouldn't take over of I think for me, it's more just a matter of like, there's just other opportunities and guys that I like better than where Edwards is going.
Damn it. CJ Daniels already went. Did not realize that. And Xavier Thomas won the pick. Oh, yeah, of course you took him.
I had to. 6'10" is like the perfect. I didn't have either the rare, neither of those, so that was like a no-brainer for me.
I was trying to stack Nuss with one of them, and I waited too long.
You get like Sheldon Sampson, right? Isn't he available?
I'd rather is Mason Taylor available?
No, I wish.
He's probably long gone.
Yeah, long gone.
There's a lot. Honestly, I find myself looking at a lot of options here. I'm going to take a player that I haven't taken any of, though. And that is Andrew Armstrong, the wide receiver at Arkansas. I've drafted Lukash. I've drafted Jaquindon Jackson, but I haven't taken any of Armstrong. I think he's going to be the wide receiver 1 there. I don't have any exposure. What if I'm wrong? I don't like him, generally speaking, but what if I'm wrong and he's going around 17 and the offense is a little bit better than we think in terms of the passing? I don't love it. I just trying to diversify a little bit. I think he's one of the options I'm trying to look at. So was Malachi Riley, the guy I took in the round 16, by the way, which, again, something that we alluded to is Malachi Riley goes round 16. Montana Money's Craig goes round 18, 19, 20. I think you should take one of them just in general. Like, I think the wide receiver 2 is going to be productive for Arizona, and it's such a discount. I think you take either. Malachi Riley's the inside slot guy taking over Cowing, and Lamoney's Craig is he's like 6'4". He's the outside guy alongside Ted McMillan. So I think you should be taking one of them. I think, so I started taking Riley more, but I'd be happy with either, to be totally honest.
Yeah, it's just such an opportunity to get something out of nothing, like a lot of something out of nothing. And if you're going to draft a bunch of these, why it'd be crazy not to take them sporadically.
Yeah. Yep. So other LSU wide receiver goes Chris Hilton, speedster. Think he has a role in the offense. Not sure what his role is, but I mean, we're getting the last 3 rounds of a best ball. I don't hate it. He's in line to start. I really, really liked him at the beginning of his collegiate career, but he just hasn't really broken out. But he was a track star in the state of Louisiana. He's crazy fast, like legit track speed.
Yeah, if I was you, I might have considered that. I don't hate the Armstrong pick, but I wouldn't have hated that pick for you. It really is anybody's game after Lacey, and even then, like, I think it's Lacey at this point, right? But it's not. It wouldn't be the craziest thing if it's not.
Yeah, I think so. Okay, so look at this. Daniel Jackson goes round 17. We think you think that's Daniel Jackson, Iowa State, or you think, it is Daniel Jackson, Iowa State. Do you think that's Daniel Jackson, Iowa State picked intentionally, or do you think it's Daniel Jackson still on the board? I want to take him because that's the Minnesota wide receiver.
Third Iowa State receiver have value? Probably not. So I would say either that's a mistake or you know what it is? I've talked about this with Cats, is that it could be if you do your own stuff and you could get name mismatches or issues, and it might be that your ranking of the good Daniel Jackson is 80th. And so you get like queued up with the wrong one at 80th, and then all of a sudden you're auto picked. That could be it.
Yeah, and if you're using Cam Stanton's rankings, we have a download for Underdog button, and it's linked to player ID, so that's not going to happen. I don't even think we have Daniel Jackson ranked, and if we do, he's outside the top 300 probably. We have the Minnesota Daniel Jackson ranked quite high. We're actually higher than consensus on him because I like Max Brosmer and think Minnesota passing offense could take a jump, or at least he's going to see a huge percentage of it. So this question's perfect for Felix, who is obsessed with this strategy. Have you guys tried from Noah? Have you guys tried drafting 5 or 6 late QBs?
No. It's the power 5. You get real thin real quick with some bad options. Like if you did that right now, you would be taking like Sam Levitt, Peyton Thorne, Alex Orji, Brock Vandegrift, and Max Johnson. Does that win you anything? I don't think so. Does it?
I don't think so. I think you need at least one quarterback by the time the 6th round rolls around. Whether you take it in the 6th and that's like a Garrett Nussmeier type, okay. But I mean Nussmeier's ADP is going up that I don't think you can really. I think you need at least one in the top 4 now, with quarterbacks being pushed up.
Yeah, it's just it's not like we're missing on like. I think people like late quarterbacks because you can find like some running ones that can provide value out of nowhere, right? Like think about Byron Brown. But like unless you're taking Eckhouse, what quarterbacks have the rushing upside or volume upside to be that like top 10 quarterback out of nowhere? And I'm looking at the guys now, right? Like I don't see it besides Eckhouse. Lagway, if Mertz got hurt week 1 or 2, but like, are we really banking on an injury like that? I don't know. I'm always taking 1, maybe 2 quarterbacks late, but I would never consider the bottom 5 or the 5 of the last 8 rounds as quarterbacks.
Yeah, I don't think you can do that either. The guys that I've been taking late are like Hudson Card, Alan Bowman, Peyton Thorne, type players, which they either have really good week 12 matchups or like playoff matchups, or I think there's a good case they're going too late because they can rebound substantially this year. And I think that's a Bowman. I think that like specifically for Bowman, like you had the stat the other day where he threw for how many pass attempts did he have?
40. I mean, the last was like 11 of the last 14 games. He averaged like 40 or 41 passing attempts per game. And he had 10 touchdown passes during that time. Like, how does that happen?
I have well, you just give the ball to Ollie Gordon in scoring position, I guess.
But they were a good offense. It's just crazy to think that would be the case again. This is not an Ollie Gordon is not RB1 conversation. It's more just like he's going to have so much volume. Nothing's changing year over year. Why wouldn't he just score 6 more touchdowns, 8 more touchdowns? That is what I'm thinking when I look at this situation.
And I think that's the way to approach it. I think he probably is the perfect guy to take as your last quarterback, which I did, but he's on that short list for me for sure.
It's all kind of the same, right? They're all this. You kind of just pick the one that you just pick the one that fits your bye weeks better, right? Like, is it Max Johnson? Is it Vandegrift? Like Vandegrift is kind of appealing to me because we haven't really seen it. But like he's got a good receiver core. He seems to have some good enough legs. Like maybe, so like that appeals to me. But it's really just like, okay, you have this pool of late quarterbacks, Orji, Card, Altmaier, even like McCord. Like you just figure out the one that fits your situation best, and then you just draft them and hope that they just give you 16 points the week that 2 guys are on bye, 1 guy is hurt, and then you have 2 quarterbacks to play with.
Your last pick, where are you going?
I had to go tight end. There's not a lot of options that fit the 6'11" Garrett Oakley bye week, so I went Boardingham. I don't like, I would have loved to go Rivaldo Fairweather, but I couldn't because of bye weeks. And Boardingham, tough schedule, but I think Mertz is more than capable, and it wouldn't shock me if he goes 40, 405, which I think is kind of that like tight end stat line you need to be valuable.
I am right there with you. I don't mind that pick at all. I ended up taking Rashad Amos with my last pick, who I believe, and I will double check the numbers, but is our single most mispriced player when it comes to our rankings versus ADP. We are substantially higher on him. And I think the upside for a player like Amos is 1,000 yards. 1,000 yards. Like it really is, because I think he's by far the best back in that Mississippi room. And he's got the size. I think he's got the athleticism. think he's probably a little bit of a knucklehead considering he's transferred like 18 times in the last 3 months. But I think he's good.
I do too. We just talked about him on the podcast this week, Ethan and I. I actually was considering Penny Boone or him, and I went with Penny this time. Just the bye weeks fit, but I will gladly take Amos as my last guy every single draft if I could.
So anything that you learned in this draft,
let's see,
or that you did differently this draft? I have to wait a minute for it to show up. In general, that you think you want to apply, because we are what 10 days plus into Underdog launching this product, and I think we've learned a lot just in that time frame about how other people are drafting. I think we kind of had an idea of how we wanted to approach things, because I mean, you and I are in a 12 draft series where we draft every 2 weeks for the off season. Like we are not unfamiliar to college fantasy, and we're not really unfamiliar to college best ball, especially like a similar-ish scoring format. Anything that you would do that you did here that you want to keep doing, or that you did and you want to not do again?
I will say this Underdog stuff has opened my eyes to some different options that I was not thinking about in the Fantrax best ball drafts I've been doing. So I'm way more open to some of these guys, because we've really had to scrape the bottom of the barrel to figure out who's valuable and who's not, and situationally who makes sense and what doesn't. Like an Amos, I've already drafted some Maccabee already, but like before this, but like Maccabee, those types that I think have more value than we realize. Like a Roman Henby, who I wasn't really on. Now I'm like looking at these Fantrax drafts, and I'm like, I need to start taking more of these guys, because I just by having to be forced into this power four only situation have found guys that have more value.
You know, it's funny. I actually end up finding myself thinking the same thing now that I've kind of changed my calculus because, you know, I don't know how many people are listening for the first time, but if you are, what we do is generally cover the entirety of the FBS, which is 134 teams. So we are in the weeds looking at double the amount that you see here, essentially, doing that analysis and trying to figure out, okay, how do we feel about certain players, positions, etc. So this has really allowed me to narrow my focus and make tougher decisions, because instead of deciding between a player like Jaden Ott and Mekhi Hughes, who's the running back at Tulane, I have to think about Jaden Ott versus Taj Brooks versus Phil Maffa, and that's a lot easier decision because there are so many more data points that you have to consider in those. And I just found it to be really clear for me to draft in different ways. So I've enjoyed them.
Yeah, these are fun. I don't know how many more I have left in the tank. I probably will have 3 to 4 I'll probably do and see where it goes. At that point, I'll be at like 30 lineups. I'm pretty spread out with my ownership. I might just try to do a couple more that are just like my absolute favorites and just kind of stack some ownership together. But we'll see. Maybe they do some promos to try to fill these things out. Sometimes you'll see that where you get buy 3, you get a 4th ticket free or something like that. That would change mine a little bit, but this has been a fun thought experiment at the very least.
I think, and it was mentioned in the chat, I think it's feeling slower because I don't know that people have a good strategy yet. Like I don't know that people want to max. I don't think that people want to max enter because I don't know that people are that confident in what they're doing. And I'm not sure I feel that confident in what I'm doing, right? This is the first time that we've really dealt with a tournament in college like this. So yes, we have DFS weekly, which is, I think you're applying some of the same principles in terms of diversification and stacking and targeting teams that we think are going to be productive in general, but it's a totally different beast when you're talking about a full slate of week 1 to week 14. This is new to this is really new to everybody.
Yeah, part of me wonders how much does stacking matter. Would my team have been better off not taking Fafita there, going somebody else at quarterback, or maybe taking a different flex player and then waiting around a 2 for a quarterback? to not worrying about stacking. Part of me wonders, but it's just different. The biggest difference is that we're shooting to beat the entire field. That's thousands of people that could still have the same teams as you. That is the differing part between DFS Weekly, Fantrax 12 team best ball, and this format. So, but the good news is we have a first year to do it. Hopefully everybody fills this out. Next year we get another one, and then we have data points to start working off of.
Yeah, and that's a good point, right? You're only making 20 grand if you max enter. And so nobody I've probably seen one or two people that are max entering just because they're in every single draft that I've been in. But I don't anticipate getting more than like 40, maybe.
Yeah, Goodman makes a good point here. That's why I think there's a couple of reasons, right? Goodman's, $1,500 investment to win 20,000 is pretty low, and I also think that there's a level of we just don't know the strategy. Like we don't know, is 4 quarterback the best way? Are we right with 1 tight end versus 2? Like those are the things that until people feel more comfortable with, the more I don't want to say like certainly not casual, but it's like the more random player that loves DFS, that loves best ball drafts, subscribes to people's work, and then plays based off of that and just the DFS knowledge. I don't think those people are there to max enter yet. I don't think there's enough confidence in the room from anybody where max entering makes sense.
Yeah, and like we said, low, and Goodman said, extremely low ROI given what it takes. And I think for you to advance to the final is like 0.83% per lineup. So no, that can't be right. I don't know. I have to do the math again now that I don't want to get the number wrong. But yeah, it's a low percentage of advancing. And then even if you get it all right, 20 grand to 1.5 is not.
You don't catch people's attention with 20 grand. You catch people's
No.
attention when you hit 6 figures. They got to start somewhere. I have no issue with it. Let's fill it out. Let's show a good impression from the community, and then let's maybe see what we can get a second time around.
I don't think so either. And I wonder if we get another one before we kick off, only because I think we're going to get close to the start of the season.
I don't think we're going to get another one, which is fun.
It came so late. I think if we go in like April or May, it'll be pretty interesting to see what happens next year. And I think, I have the Campus Canton bye week tracker up, and you can see all of these week 12 buys as I scroll down, right? Duke, Florida State, Georgia Tech, Indiana, Iowa. I think next year this is something that they fix. I don't think that we're going to have any playoff bye weeks. Or I don't want to say any playoff bye weeks, but at least no more than like 2 or 3. I think.
Well, isn't next year different? Like this year's different because there's just the way it works with Saturdays or something. Is that we have 14 weeks, not 13 or something like that? Like, I know Nate has talked about this in the past. I can't remember what he said, but like, are we going to get 2 bye weeks next year for everybody?
I would think so, just with the expanded playoff and everything, but I don't know for sure. My guess would be that the bye week situation is not nearly as like quote catastrophic as it is this year, where we've 18 Power 5 teams on bye in week 12, and then 3 more in SMU, Oregon, Washington, week 13.
Yeah, I think just from a UX standpoint too, they can make it look better. Would people feel better about drafting if we had the bye weeks in the draft and showing when you draft your team? I would say, yeah, I feel more the player that isn't the degenerate like ourselves, people that subscribe, which we love. Those people feel better about drafting than the random person.
I think the only way to draft is to have some sort of schedule matrix or bye week tracker. I don't think you can draft without it. And I think Campus Canton has a really good one. Just in general, I think that, you can see it on the screen here, player by week, and then you can go by team as well. So I think we've recognized that as a huge concern in drafting. and try to improve as much as we can because Underdog doesn't offer it. But I would guess next time around, Underdog offers bye weeks. If not this year, which 50-50 at best, maybe, probably not. I think next year we get bye weeks.
Yeah, I've said something to them. They're very open and willing to give us take feedback, and they said it's basically not possible because it's too quick of a turnaround. I think next year is their goal, but I think it'd be super helpful and it would help everybody, the underdog and the drafter. It's impossible to do it without it. You'd have to literally memorize everything or have multiple screens up with a spreadsheet that you spent hours on to create.
And hopefully we get that next year, make it a little bit easier on the user. But for now, head to campuscan.com. We have the resource to try to help you navigate these. It is very difficult. I find myself even with it up and working and knowing what I know, I still find myself falling into some of the traps with bye weeks and schedules. So really good tool. Now that we've wrapped the draft up, we've talked a little bit about strategy, just players in general. Anything that you want to add before we head out today?
I don't think so. Check out the pod that Ethan and I did. What was it called? Austin made me name it something super boring.
It's the Campus Can Best Ball Show is what it's called.
Yeah, coming from the guy that named their podcast Campus Life. I'm not surprised. There's nothing creative out of those choices. But yeah, check it out. I'd be curious to hear your feedback. If this thing does fill and we don't get a second, willing to take suggestions on how to kind of proceed moving forward. Ethan and I do a show already on DFS stuff. Maybe we roll 15 minutes of that conversation towards these underdog drafts because they have some bigger money ones too, right? They've created $50 and $100 tournaments that you can do where it's just like the typical Fantrax 12-team basketball stuff, which will be fun. So maybe we roll that into it, but send us feedback. Curious to hear what you guys want, and then we can just kind of adapt and go from there.
Yeah, make sure you're subscribing to the podcast feed in general. We have a ton of shows coming out, especially related to this is a new show for us, so it's exciting, but we have a ton of content on there related all the way from recruiting to college fantasy to Devi. It's a definitely worth following. And if you like, again, what we did here today, make sure that you're liking this video. Let's get it to 40, 50 likes. We can easily do that. I see how many people are watching. Not a huge ask. And, you can find everything I do at Chris Moxley 19 on Twitter. You can find everything Chris does at Realist Chris K.
Yep. Chris K was already taken. Too generic of a name, unfortunately.
Well, we got the Realist with us. Chris, thanks for joining me. This was fun.
Yeah, I'm glad to do it. Great Friday afternoon activity. We'll catch you guys next time.
Take care, y'all.